Hello my guys, welcome to my February TBR where we are going to be talking about all of the things that I'm aiming to read in the upcoming month. And this month is going to be an interesting one actually because I have been challenged by Aaron from Booked and Busy to read exclusively sequels for an entire month. There are going to be just a couple of exceptions to this. The main ones are my Patreon picks because the majority of the books in the jar are not sequels. The good news though is that I did manage to read through the majority of my outstanding Patreon picks in January. So there's only one that I'm actually carrying forward into February, plus the one that we are of course going to be adding for this month. I mean, we could get extremely lucky because there are a couple of sequels in the pot as well as a couple of like more mood read options in there. But obviously we can't guarantee that that's going to happen, and it is exceedingly unlikely if I'm being honest. But all of the book club books that I need to read this month are sequels. Shelve It or Scrap It, spoiler alert, is going to center around sequels and actually was going to before Aaron issued this challenge. I have a buddy read with Aaron that is also a sequel, and then I'm just going to mention a few books that I would like to get to, like my priority sequels, if I have time to get to them at the end of the month, because while I do want to commit fully to this challenge, I do need to get started on a couple of videos that I'm going to be pre-filming for a little bit later in the year, and I really ideally do need to make a start on those in February as well. So there are going to be more books in this video than I would typically include in a TBR because we not only have my mandatory reads but those priority sequels, and I am also going to quickly run through my library books, although as I discussed last month, these are just the books that I currently have out. A new one did come in that I put a hold on in like November or December, so I do have an additional one, but moving forward I'm going to exclusively have like one library book out once I've resolved all of the things that I already had on hold and have like collected. So my priority reads are obviously the ones that we're going to cover first, and the most important of those are my book club books. So on the 9th of February we are going to have the live show for The Gathering Storm by Robert Jordan, which is book 12, yes, in the Wheel of Time series. I'm pretty sure that this live discussion is going to be on Deb's channel. I will double check, but I will link the channel that the live show is going to be on down in my description box in case you would like to join and hear our thoughts. But this one is the 12th book in an adult epic fantasy series. It's classic fantasy and it is following an epic struggle between the forces of light and dark, and we are following this age's dragon reborn, who is a pivotal figure in this eternal battle as he hopefully tips the forces towards light for good. Brandon Sanderson has now taken over this series. This is the first Brandon Sanderson book, and a lot of people, including myself, were interested to see how I would feel when Brandon Sanderson took over. I do think that this is a little bit more cohesive. I don't necessarily think it's more enjoyable though. That being said, I have started this. I'm 250 pages in and I'm listening to the audio of this. I need to listen to about an hour a day to be done for the live show. It is a very long one. So I am a little bit worried, but I always get there in the end. My other book club book is for my Patreon book club, which is the Alpha Book Club. It is a fantasy romance series read-along book club, and we recently started the Lady of Darkness series by Melissa K. Rorich, and the book for January and February is the second book, Lady of Shadows. This one is a fantasy romance series that is very reminiscent of Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas, where we're following an assassin who is a little bit estranged from the assassin lord that trained her after her mother died, and she's currently living on a noble's estates when the assassin lord offers her a job that she cannot refuse to bring her back into the fold. The job that she is assigned is a little bit of a mystery, but essentially it will allow her to get revenge on the Fae Fire Prince that killed her mother. So I really enjoyed book one, although I did find it a little bit repetitive, and I'm excited to get into book two. I recently picked up the ebook of this because it was on a 99p Kindle deal, and I do have the physical of book one, but I think I'll kind of wait till I get to the end of the series and see whether I want to invest in this series in physical copies. Honestly, it depends how much the ebooks are. If I can get them all for 99p, I'll probably continue that way, but if they're any more than $1.99, I'd rather buy the physical copy. On my unofficial Patreon read along of the Pretty Little Liars series by Sarah Shepard, we are currently up to book 11, which is stunning. Every month during our 24-hour readathons, I read an installment in this series because they're incredibly quick reads, very engaging and entertaining. And this one is of course a young adult mystery series about a group of girls whose friend goes missing in high school. Their friendship group pretty much dissolves after this, but it comes back together when they start to receive threatening text messages from an anonymous source called A. This one I think is a little bit shorter. Yes, it's under it's 304 304 pages, which is good because the last two I feel have had an extra like 50 to 70 pages on that feel very unnecessary. So I'm glad we're going back to like the 300 page mark that has been consistent for most of the series. The one Patreon pick that I'm going to be rolling over is Daughter of the Drowned Empire by Frankie Diane Malice. This one was November's pick and it's also Natty's pick, and I believe that it is a fantasy romance about a girl who goes to a ceremony to reveal her power and finds out that she's powerless, so she has to go to some sort of training academy instead. That is the very little that I know about this. It feels like a very fantasy forward fantasy romance, which is my personal favorite. And I am currently filming a romance leaning reading vlog right now, but I'm not sure if this is going to make it in. If it does, it will be the last book that I read. So there's potential that I'll finish this in like the first few days of February, but I know for sure I'm not going to be finishing it in January. And then for our February pick, if you guys are unfamiliar with my Patreon picks, the inner circle tier of my Patreon can recommend a book that goes into this jar, and every month I pull one out and I aim to read it in the month that follows. Now, sometimes I do get a little bit backlogged. I think I've just read 3 in January, and as you just saw, I am also rolling one over. But now that I've kind of cleared through a lot of those, I'm definitely aiming to stay a little bit more on track. But let's see what February has in store. I'd like a nice little romance or a sequel to fit into our theme. I'm gonna deep dive for this. I have mixed them up again this month. This one is green, which I'm pretty sure means that it was added in 2024. Rouge by Greer Rivers, and it is Caitlin's pick. It is a romance, and by the looks of it, it is also a sequel. I'm assuming it is the second book in like a series of standalones, but it says it is a dark billionaire romance with a secret society twist and a happy ever after. It has one of those kind of typical new adult romance synopses that doesn't really say very much. I think that the main female character is promised to this guy, but her father steals her from him and like sells her to another, so he has to steal her back and they have to keep their relationship a secret. But then later on it says Rouge is a spicy story set in modern day Las Vegas and a complete standalone, there we go, in the Tattered Curtain series. Oh, it says this is not a retelling. The Tattered Curtain series transforms tragic plays such as Romeo and Juliet and Orpheus and Eurydice into dark and twisted happily ever afters. So up until that point I was like, I could enjoy this, but I also could not. But now I am definitely more intrigued, and it does seem like the kind of book that would be available on KU. It is indeed, and Amazon says that the print copy is 466 pages, so a little bit long for a romance, but not too out of the ordinary for like an indie romance. And then my last obligatory read for February is my buddy read with Aaron, which of course is Sunbringer by Hannah Kana. We buddy read Godkiller in January and I really enjoyed it, especially the writing style and the atmosphere. But this is a fantasy series. I'm pretty sure it's a trilogy, and the third book is going to be on its way to me very, very soon, so I'm planning on lining that one up for March as well. But it is following a godkiller who is essentially a mercenary that is hired to kill gods. However, there has been a civil war a few years prior to the start of the series, and so the god killers are now in service to the king, and the god killer meets a little girl who is tethered to a god, which is unusual because gods are normally tethered to shrines, and the little girl essentially begs this god killer to take her to the city where a bunch of gods still live, and there are pilgrimages to worship them even though it's against the law, and this is like a forbidden area but people still sneak in. So the god killer and the little girl travel to this city, and on the way they meet a knight who has been retired since the Civil War, who is on a very important mission for the king, who is also one of his closest friends. These are quite short for fantasy stories, but they are, I wouldn't say that they're overly dense, but they're dense considering their size. This one is a little bit longer as well. It's about 80 pages longer, which is actually great, I feel, because while I especially love the atmosphere and the writing of book one, I would have liked a little bit more from the plot, which I obviously think is going to develop in Sunbringer. As for the library books that I currently have out, these ones are, I'm not sure whether one of them would class as a thriller or a horror, but the other one is definitely a horror, and it's the one that I mentioned last month, which is The September House by Clarissa Orlando. If I remember correctly, this is about a couple who buy a house, and every September weird things start to happen. I think the walls start to bleed. Since I said to you guys that I might not end up getting to this just because I'm not prioritizing library books, I'm trying to rely a little less on my library this year because I need to get through the books that I own. But a lot of you guys in the comments said that this was really good and I should get to it, and I would love to, but it's not a priority. And then the other one is the one that I put a hold on in like November or December, which has just come in, and I haven't heard anything about this. I saw it when I did my anticipated releases for the second half of last year, and it sounds really interesting to me, so I just put it on as a whim, and I was thrilled when I saw that my library have this, and that is The Hitchcock Hotel by Stephanie Wrobel. This one is about a guy who owns a hotel that's dedicated to Alfred Hitchcock, so it has tons of movie memorabilia and it's all themed around Hitchcock movies. And one year after the hotel opens, he invites a group of his college friends to stay at the hotel, and everything is going well until I think they start to die, but in ways that the characters of Hitchcock movies die. So in the synopsis it says that one sees somebody like stood outside their shower curtain, which is of course the iconic scene from Psycho. And as a big Hitchcock fan, I really, really want to read this one. Like I said, I've heard nobody talk about it. I haven't looked up the rating. I don't know if it's any good, but the movie nerd inside me really wants to read this one. And then I just have my list of priority sequels. I'm going to go through these pretty quickly just because I don't know what I'm actually going to get to. Honestly, if any, if I end up working on that project that I want to film ahead a little bit, which I really, really need to, if I'm being honest. But the first one on this list is A Promise of Lies by Claire Sager, which is the last book in the Shadows of the Tenebrous Court series. This one was released on New Year's Eve, so it is one that I've wanted to get to because I only very recently read the first two books in this series. And this one is like a shadow daddy fantasy romance about a woman who is sent to the court to spy on a Fey Lord that the royal spy master thinks is a threat to the queen. One that is released in February is The Fox and the Falcon by Piper CJ. I currently have like 40 pages left of the first book, and I'm actually enjoying it way more than I expected, so I'm very interested in picking up the second book, especially seeing as it's released so soon. This one is once again a shadow daddy romance. It has more of an urban fantasy lean though, following a girl who can see behind the veil. So she's been haunted by this shadow daddy character her entire life, and she thinks he's a hallucination and that insanity runs in her family. However, after she essentially nearly dies and she's saved, she realizes that all of the things that she's been seeing throughout her life are actually real, and she ends up on a quest to find her shadow daddy, who she accidentally banished when she thought that he was just a hallucination. One that I've just got my hands on, it was released in January, is Four Ruined Realms by Mike Holland. This one is the sequel to Five Broken Blades, which is a fantasy heist story about a group of people who are down on their luck, who are given a task to assassinate their king. It was one that I read, I think in November or December for Shelve It or Scrap It, and I ended up really enjoying it, so I'm excited to dive into book 2. And the audiobook for both of these, I'm assuming that it's the same for book 2 as it was for book 1, but the audiobook for book 1 was full cast, and both of the audiobooks are available on Everand, so I plan on tandem reading this one. One that I've technically already started, so I would very much like to finish, is The Mistake by Elle Kennedy. I read the deal for January's episode of Shelve It or Scrap It, and I enjoyed it once again much more than I anticipated, so I went straight into the sequel, but because I've had to prioritize other things, I've put this on the back burner a little bit to pick up at a later date. This is a series of hockey romances, and in The Mistake, I've only put it down for a week, but let's see if I can remember. We are following Logan, who is in love with his best friend's girlfriend, which is really bringing him down. And our female main character is a freshman who is trying to lose her virginity. I'm only like 40 or 50 pages in, and that's all I can gather from where I'm currently at. I do prefer the deal right now, but I'm very interested in continuing and seeing where this series takes me as a whole. And then the last one I have is The Undermining of Twyla and Frank by Megan Bannon. This one I think is perfect for February, and it's also good because it is a standalone in a series of like fantasy rom-coms. This one is a retelling of I think When Harry Met Sally, and it is following Twyla, who is a widow and she's a little bit older. It says in the synopsis that she's middle-aged, and she convinces her best friend, who is a little bit younger than her, summer to join the Marshals. Now, marshalling in this world after book 1 is not as exciting as it used to be, and I think somebody new comes into this equation that Twyla finds herself maybe romantically interested in, and for some reason Frank is not happy about this. So I really love the first book. I'm very excited to pick up book 2, and this would get me up to date, ready for book 3 releasing later this year as well. So these are all of the books that I hope to read in February. As I said, not all of them are a priority, and probably only around half of them are going to get read, but I wanted to give myself a little stack of priority sequels to work through if I end up having time, or if I can like read anything in the background of other projects that I may be working on. As we all know, sequels is an area that I keep indicating it needs work, and I think that something like this, like a concentrated month or maybe every few months focusing exclusively on sequels, will really help me. And it just so happened that February was perfect because, oh, should mention, on top of all of these, I have to read, I think, 7 books for Shelve It or Scrap It, all sequels. So the amount of these that I get through, it's not going to be the most, but I still am, because of Shelve It or Scrap It, going to get through a majority of sequels in the month. And because I already planned to do sequels for Shelve It or Scrap It, it's just worked out that February was the perfect month for me to actually focus on this. Let me know if you have read any of these and what you thought of them. I just realized like how many ebooks I have to add onto this stack as well. It's truly unrealistic, but as always, I'm optimistic. I'm Delulu. And if you guys would like to let me know that you were here, but you don't feel like you have anything to say, leave me a dragon emoji for the undermining of Twyla and Frank. But aside from that, guys, please don't forget to like this video if you liked it, and subscribe if you wanna. If you head into my description box, you'll find a link to my Goodreads, my Instagram, and my Patreon if you would like to join me on any of those. But that's it from me today, guys. Bye!
Oh, you bite your friend like chocolate. You say you're go where nobody knows, with guns hidden under our petticoats. We're never gonna quit it, no, we're never gonna quit it, no.